Welcome back, my friend. If today has been long, heavy, or filled with too many thoughts, then this quiet moment is for you. Before our story begins, give yourself permission to stop carrying the day. You do not need to solve everything tonight. You do not need to answer every worry. For now, simply let the world slow down. Draw the curtains, turn off the bright lights, or let them fade into a softer glow. Rest your body into the bed, loosen your shoulders, unclench your hands, and let your breathing become gentle. Here, we explore the quiet side of history and science, told slowly, softly, and peacefully, so your mind can drift while your body begins to rest. If this is your first time here, please subscribe and join us for more calming stories made for sleep. Now, close your eyes if you wish, settle into the stillness, and let tonight's story carry you away. There are places on the ocean that ships no longer cross, not because they can't, but because they choose not to. Coordinates that don't show up on tourist maps, routes quietly erased from navigation plans, waters where, if something happens, there may be no one close enough to hear it. Sometimes it's the depth, sometimes it's the currents, sometimes it's just history. Ships that entered and never came back, signals that faded into static, journeys that ended without explanation. Tonight, we are not chasing storms or following famous routes. We are drifting into the parts of the ocean that have been left behind. The silence between shipping lanes. If you look at the ocean on a map, it appears simple, a wide expanse of blue, stretching from one continent to another, broken only by thin outlines of land. But if you look closer, not at the color, but at the movement, the ocean begins to change. Modern satellite maps that track ship traffic do not show emptiness. They show patterns, thin lines of motion crossing the surface of the world, from the ports of northern Europe down toward the Mediterranean, from the eastern coast of the United States across to Western Africa, from Southeast Asia to the Middle East to Australia, to everywhere that trade continues. These lines are not random. They are repeated, refined, chosen over decades, sometimes over centuries. Each one represents a path that has been tested, a route that balances distance, fuel efficiency, weather patterns, and safety. A route where ships expect to encounter other ships, where communication is steady, where, if something goes wrong, there is at least the possibility that someone else is close enough to respond. And when you see all of these lines together, they form something familiar, a network, a quiet, moving web across the surface of the ocean. But it is not continuous. Between those lines, there are gaps, wide spaces where no routes overlap, places where the map returns to stillness. At first, those empty spaces do not seem important. They are simply areas without traffic. But if you spend time looking at them, something begins to shift, because they are not small. They are not narrow. Some of them stretch for thousands of kilometers, larger than entire countries, larger than regions that people live in every day, and yet almost nothing crosses them. Not because it is impossible, but because there is no reason to. Ships move with purpose. Every journey is planned around arrival. Cargo must reach a destination. Fuel must be managed carefully. Time matters, so routes are chosen to be efficient, direct but not too direct, predictable but not rigid, and above all, connected to ports, to other ships, to systems that allow navigation to remain steady. The empty spaces offer none of that. There are no major ports nearby, no infrastructure beneath the surface, no cables carrying communications, no steady presence of vessels moving in parallel, only distance. And distance on the ocean is different than distance on land. On land, distance can be crossed with roads, with signs, with places to stop. There are interruptions, markers that tell you where you are and how far you've come. But at sea, distance is continuous. There are no landmarks. Once land disappears, no fixed reference points except the sky and the instruments on board. And in those empty regions, even the idea of nearby begins to lose meaning, because nearby might still be hundreds of kilometers away. A ship could change course slightly, just a few degrees, and find itself drifting into one of these spaces. At first, nothing would feel different. The water would look the same, the sky would remain unchanged, the engines would continue their steady rhythm, but gradually something subtle would begin to emerge. There would be fewer signals on radar, fewer shapes, fewer distant contacts appearing at the edge of detection. On the radio, longer gaps between transmissions, not silence, but less, a thinning of presence. And if the ship continued, if it moved deeper into that open space, that thinning would continue until eventually there would be nothing left to thin. No ships on the horizon, no signals to receive, no movement except your own. At that point, the ocean would not feel larger because it always was, but it would feel less connected, as if something had been removed, not physically, but in terms of awareness, the knowledge that others are nearby, that someone somewhere could see you, could hear you, could respond. Without that, the ocean changes, not in appearance, but in perception. And this is why ships avoid those empty regions, not out of fear, not because something is wrong, but because of what is missing. Support, redundancy, the quiet safety that comes from not being alone. Modern navigation has reduced many uncertainties. GPS provides exact positioning, weather forecasts extend far ahead, communication systems can reach across the globe, but none of these completely replace physical proximity. Because if something fails, if a system goes offline, if power is lost, if damage occurs, technology becomes limited and time becomes the most important factor. How long until help arrives? How long until another vessel is close enough to assist? How long you remain alone in the shipping lanes? That time is measured in hours. In the empty spaces, it can stretch into days, and days on open water are not just units of time. They are conditions, changing weather, shifting currents, unknown developments. So the routes stay where they are, close enough to each other to maintain connection, far enough apart to remain efficient, a balance that has been refined over years of experience, and the spaces between them remain untouched, not explored in detail, not monitored constantly, simply left as they are. If you were to travel across one of these regions, you would not find anything hidden, no structures, no unexpected formations, only water. But it is the absence of everything else that defines it. No passing ships to mark the passage of time, no changes in traffic to signal movement, through space, only a steady progression forward, measured by instruments and by the slow shift of the sky. And eventually, after long enough, you would reach another line, another route, another place where ships move again, where signals return, where the network resumes. And the moment you cross back into it, you would feel the difference, not dramatically, but clearly. A distant light on the horizon, a signal returning to the radar screen, a voice over the radio. Small things, but enough to remind you that you are no longer alone and that the empty space behind you still exists, unchanged, waiting for no one in particular. And that is perhaps the most defining thing about those places. They are not avoided because they are dangerous. They are not hidden because they are unknown. They are simply unnecessary. And so the world moves around them, leaving behind vast regions of ocean where nothing happens, where no one passes, and where the silence is not an event, but a constant. Point Nemo, the ocean's loneliest coordinate. If the empty spaces between shipping lanes feel distant, there is one place that takes that distance to its absolute limit, a single point in the South Pacific Ocean. No land nearby, no islands within reach, no routes passing through. This place is known as Point Nemo. Its name comes from fiction. Captain Nemo, a man who chose to live away from the world. But here, the distance is not a choice, it is geography. From Point Nemo, the nearest land in any direction is more than 2,600 kilometers away. That is farther than most people ever travel in a single journey. And yet here, it is simply the minimum distance to anything solid. 3 separate land masses sit at the edge of that radius, small, isolated islands scattered across the Pacific, none of them large, none of them populated in any meaningful way, and all of them equally far. If you were standing at that exact coordinate, though there is nowhere to stand, you would be closer to objects in orbit than to any human settlement on Earth. Above you, circling silently, would be the International Space Station, a structure built by humans, inhabited, moving at extraordinary speed. And yet, in that moment, it would be nearer to you than any city. That idea feels abstract at first, but over time, it begins to settle. Because distance in places like this is no longer about movement. It becomes about isolation. Point Nemo is not marked by anything visible. No change in the color of the water. No shift in the waves. No landmark to tell you that you have arrived. If a ship were to pass through it, which almost none do, nothing would signal the crossing. The instruments would update, coordinates would change, but the ocean itself would remain the same, flat, endless, uninterrupted. And that is what makes it different from other remote places. It does not announce itself. It does not stand out. It is defined entirely by what is not there. No fishing activity, no commercial routes, no research stations anchored nearby. Even under the surface, there is very little to draw attention. The seabed here is deep, thousands of meters below, too far for most exploration, too far for routine observation. So even the hidden world beneath remains largely undisturbed. At times, satellites pass overhead and capture images of the region, but those images show very little. No ships, no wakes in the water, no movement, just a wide, unbroken field of blue. And if you watch those images, over time, they remain almost unchanged. a kind of stillness that is difficult to find anywhere else on the planet, because most places, even remote ones, have something: a fishing boat, a research vessel, a passing aircraft. But here, there is often nothing at all, and that absence has led to an unusual use. When objects in space reach the end of their function, when satellites are no longer operational, when structures can no longer be maintained, they must return to Earth. But they cannot return just anywhere. A falling object from orbit moves at tremendous speed. Even after burning in the atmosphere, what remains can still be large enough to cause damage. So engineers choose carefully. They look for a place where nothing will be affected. No cities, no shipping lanes, no population. And again, they return to the same answer: Point Nemo. Over the years, hundreds of spacecraft have been guided to re-enter the atmosphere. Above this region, controlled descents, calculated paths, each one ending in the same way. Fragments breaking apart as they fall. Heat, friction, light, brief and intense. And then, what remains disappears into the ocean below. No witnesses, no crowds, no record, except the data collected by those who guided it down. Below the surface, those fragments settle, slowly descending through cold, dark water until they reach the seabed, joining other remnants that have arrived the same way. And over time, Point Nemo becomes something else. Not just a location, but a quiet destination for things that are finished. Machines that once moved through space, now resting in a place where almost nothing else arrives. And yet, even with that role, the region does not feel active. There are no markers floating above it, no buoys, no warnings. From the perspective of a ship, if one ever passed nearby, it would still appear empty, completely unchanged. That is the nature of this place. It absorbs without altering. It receives without responding. And for most of the world, it remains unnoticed. There are no regular journeys here, no schedules, no destinations, just coordinates written in navigation systems, a point that exists only when you are looking for it and disappears again once you move away. If you imagine drifting there, not traveling with urgency, not following a route, but simply arriving, you would not find anything to confirm your location. No sound would change, no signal would shift dramatically. Only one thing might feel different: the awareness of how far away everything else is, not in numbers, but in presence. The absence of nearby land, the absence of passing ship, the absence of interruption, a kind of quiet that is not created, but revealed when everything else is removed. And after a while, even that awareness would begin to fade, because the ocean does not emphasize isolation. It does not highlight distance. It simply continues, wave after wave, movement after movement, until the idea of center no longer matters, and Point Nemo, the loneliest coordinate on Earth, becomes just another part of the sea, unmarked, unchanged, and completely still. The graveyard beneath the waves. If Point Nemo is defined by what is not there, then what lies beneath it is defined by what has arrived slowly, quietly, over time. Not ships in the usual sense, not vessels that sail and were lost, but fragments, remnants of objects that once moved far above the Earth. Satellites, modules, sections of structures that circled the planet For years, sometimes decades, when their time ended, they did not remain in orbit. They were guided down carefully, not in a single piece, but in stages. As they entered the atmosphere, they encountered resistance. Heat built rapidly. Surfaces began to burn. Materials weakened, then broke apart. Panels separated. Components detached. What had once been a single structure became many, and as those pieces continued downward, most of them disappeared, reduced to ash by the friction of the air. But not all. Some fragments, larger, denser, more resistant, survived, not intact, but present. They fell the remaining distance toward the ocean at high speed, but with less force than when they first entered. And when they reached the surface, the moment was brief. A splash, a disturbance that lasted only seconds. Water rising, then falling back into place. No witness to observe it, no nearby ship to record the event. Only a moment of impact, and then nothing. The surface returned to calm. The sky remained unchanged, and the fragments began their final descent. Below the surface, the world changes quickly. Light fades within meters. Color disappears. Sound becomes muted, absorbed by the surrounding water. The fragments move downward, slowed now by resistance, turning slightly, shifting orientation, following no path, no direction, only gravity. As they descend further, the temperature drops, pressure increases, the environment becomes less familiar, less active, and eventually they enter a region where very little moves at all. The deep ocean floor at Point Nemo. This floor lies thousands of meters below an abyssal plain, wide, flat, covered in fine sediment. There are no strong currents here, no waves, only a slow accumulation of particles, tiny fragments of organic matter falling from above. What scientists sometimes call marine snow, a steady, gentle descent that never stops. And into this quiet environment, the fragments arrive, not all at once, not in clusters, but one by one. A piece of metal, a section of frame, a component no longer connected to anything else, each one reaching the seabed after a long, gradual fall. And when they arrive, they do not settle dramatically. There is no impact that disturbs the landscape, only a small shift in the sediment, a faint imprint, and then stillness again. Over time, these pieces accumulate, not in organized patterns, not in visible fields, but scattered, separated by distance, each one resting where it happened to land. There are no markers to indicate their presence, no signs that anything lies below. From the surface, there is no difference. The ocean above remains empty, unchanged, and yet, far beneath that surface, there is a quiet collection of objects that once moved through space, a kind of graveyard, not in the traditional sense, because nothing here was buried intentionally. Nothing was placed with ceremony or recognition, but still, it is a place where things have come to rest, where movement has ended, where purpose has been completed, and what remains is simply presence. There is no decay in the way we understand it on land, no weather to erode surfaces quickly, no oxygen to accelerate change. Instead, everything happens slowly, very slowly. Edges soften over years. Surfaces become covered by fine layers of sediment. In some cases, small forms of life may appear, organisms that exist even at these depths, but even they move slowly, grow slowly. Everything here follows a different rhythm, a rhythm defined not by days or nights, but by duration, by the passage of time, without interruption. And because of that, these fragments remain not preserved exactly as they were, but not erased either. They become part of the environment, integrated into the stillness. There are no regular visits to this place, no expeditions that return again and again, because there is little to observe directly. The depth makes access difficult. The scale makes it hard to locate anything specific. And so, for the most part, this region remains unvisited, unseen, left as it is. And that is perhaps what makes it unique. Not that it contains remnants of human activity, but that those remnants exist without attention, without disturbance, without even awareness. From most of the world, they rest in a place where almost nothing else happens, where no ships pass above, where no light reaches below, and where the passage of time is felt not through change, but through continuity. If you were somehow able to stand there on that distant seabed, you would not find a field of objects. You would find space, wide, open space, with occasional forms emerging from the sediment, quiet, unmoving, separated by long distances, each one a trace of something that once traveled far beyond this place and now has come to rest in the most remote part of the ocean, not lost, not forgotten, simply no longer moving. And above it all, far above, the surface continues, waves forming and dissolving, currents shifting slowly, the sky passing overhead with no indication of what lies below, only water, only distance, and a silence that extends from the surface all the way down to the deepest point where anything remains. Why some places are meant to stay empty. After a while, as you move through these ideas, empty routes, distant coordinates, silent depths, a quiet question begins to form. Why are these places empty? Not how, not where, but why? Because in a world that is constantly expanding, constantly reaching outward, it seems unusual that anything would remain untouched. We map everything. We measure distances, track movement, record data. We build systems that connect one place to another. And yet, there are still regions on the ocean that remain outside of all that, not hidden, not inaccessible, just unused. At first, the answer appears simple. There is no reason to go there, no resources to gather, no ports to reach, no advantage in passing through. Ships follow efficiency. They move along paths that reduce time and fuel, and anything that does not contribute to that purpose is quietly left aside. But if you stay with the question a little longer, the answer becomes less about function and more about balance. Because not every space needs to be filled, not every distance needs to be crossed. Some places exist as they are, not because we have chosen to ignore them, but because nothing requires them to change. On land, this idea is harder to see. There are boundaries, ownership, development. Even remote areas are eventually explored, mapped in detail, and often transformed. But the ocean operates differently. It is too large to occupy completely, too continuous to divide in the same way. And because of that, it allows for something rare, unclaimed space, not in a legal sense, but in a practical one. Space that is not part of any system, not connected to any network, not integrated into any routine. And in those spaces, something subtle happens. Time feels different, not slower in a measurable way, but less defined. Without activity to mark its passage, time becomes less noticeable. There are no schedules, no arrivals or departures, no sequence of events to create structure, only continuity. The same movement of water, the same shift of light, again and again, until distinction begins to fade. And in that fading, the idea of purpose becomes less important, because purpose is usually tied to direction, to moving towards something, to achieving an outcome. But in these empty regions, there is nothing to reach, no endpoint that defines the journey, only presence, the act of being there without needing to arrive. For ships, this is not practical. They cannot afford to drift without direction. They must move efficiently, predictably. They must connect one place to another. So they avoid these spaces, not because they are dangerous, but because they do not serve the function of movement. And over time, that avoidance creates a pattern, a quiet agreement that does not need to be spoken. Routes remain where they are. Gaps remain between them, and the empty regions stay empty. But for a moment, just as a thought, you can imagine what it would be like to enter one of those spaces without a plan, to leave it quickly, not as a detour, not as an error, but intentionally to move away from the lines, to step outside the network. At first, very little would change. The instruments would continue to function. The ship would remain stable, but gradually the absence would become clearer. Fewer signals, fewer references, less indication of where others are. And then, after enough time, a different kind of awareness, not of isolation as something negative, but of space, unstructured space, a place where nothing is expected, where no one is waiting, where no schedule applies. And in that space, something quiet can settle, a sense that not everything needs to be filled, that not every part of the world requires movement, activity, or attention. Some places can remain exactly as they are, not improved, not changed, simply present. And the ocean, more than any other place, allows that, because it does not resist emptiness. It does not attempt to replace it. It does not react to the absence of activity. It simply continues, wave after wave, current after current, with or without anything passing through. And perhaps that is why these places feel different, not because they contain something unusual, but because they do not contain what we are used to. No structure, no pattern of use, no indication that they are part of anything larger. And yet they are part of the same ocean that carries ships, connects continents, and supports movement. But they do so by remaining still, by not participating in that movement, by holding space for something else, something quieter, something that does not need to be defined. And when you step back, when you consider the entire ocean as a whole, those empty regions are not gaps. They are balance. They are the spaces that allow everything else to move without becoming crowded, without losing direction. They are the silence between sounds, the pause between moments. And without them, the ocean would feel different, more full, more active, but perhaps less calm. So they remain not marked on most maps, not part of most journeys, just there, unchanged, unnecessary, and quietly essential in a way that does not need to be explained, only noticed when everything else falls away. The route that slowly disappeared. Not all empty places on the ocean begin as empty. Some of them were once used, crossed repeatedly, trusted, familiar, routes that ships followed without hesitation, paths that appeared on navigation charts as clearly as any modern shipping lane. And yet, over time, something changed, not suddenly, not in a way that could be pointed to as a single event, but gradually, quietly, until those routes were no longer used. In the North Atlantic, before the age of modern navigation, ships did not move along fixed corridors. There were no glowing lines connecting continents, no satellite guidance to keep vessels precisely on course. Instead, there was wind, there were currents, seasonal patterns, experience passed from one voyage to the next. Captains learned which paths worked best, not because they were shortest, but because they were reliable. A route that took longer but offered steady winds was often preferred. A path that seemed direct but passed through unstable weather was avoided. These decisions were not recorded in a central system. They existed in memory, in logbooks, in conversations between sailors, and over time they formed patterns, paths that were used again and again, routes that ships returned to because they worked. But alongside those patterns, there were others, less consistent, routes that were tried and then used less often, not abandoned immediately, just chosen less. Perhaps a voyage took longer than expected. Perhaps the wind shifted in ways that were difficult to predict. Perhaps a storm appeared with little warning. None of these things were unusual on the ocean. They were part of the experience. But when they happen, more often along a particular path, that path began to change, not physically, but in perception. It became less certain, and uncertainty for those navigating open water was something to be minimized. So alternative routes were explored, paths that curved slightly north or drifted a little south, small adjustments. At first, a few degrees on a compass heading, but those small changes had long-term effects because once a new route proved more reliable, even by a small margin, it was used again and again until it became the preferred path, and the old route remained still open, still possible, but no longer chosen. At sea, there is no barrier to prevent a ship from returning to such a route. No sign that says, "Do not enter." No visible marker to indicate that something has been left behind. Only absence, a lack of recent tracks, a quiet space where traffic once passed. And if a ship were to follow one of those older paths today, if it were to trace a line that was once common, he would find nothing unusual in the water itself. The waves would move as they always have. The sky would remain unchanged. There would be no indication that this route had ever been used differently, but there would be something missing, not in the environment, but in the experience. No nearby vessels moving in parallel, no distant lights appearing at predictable intervals, no steady rhythm of communication between ships sharing the same path, only open water, a sense that this direction is no longer part of the flow. And that feeling, subtle as it is, has weight, because navigation is not only about direction, it is also about expectation, knowing what you are likely to encounter, knowing what lies ahead, even if it is far away. And when a route no longer carries that expectation. When it becomes unpredictable or simply unused, it begins to fade, not from maps entirely, but from practice, from habit, from the collective memory of those who traveled the sea. Modern shipping has made this process more precise. Data is collected, routes are optimized, weather patterns are analyzed with increasing accuracy, and yet the underlying principle remains the same. Paths are chosen based on reliability, on consistency, on the quiet assurance that the journey will proceed as expected, and anything that does not meet those criteria is gradually set aside, not rejected outright, just used less until eventually it is no longer part of the system. What remains then is not a forbidden route, not a dangerous zone, but a space that exists outside of regular movement, a place where ships could go but almost never do, and over time that absence becomes complete. Years pass, then decades. New generations of sailors follow established routes without question, because those routes work, because they are known, and the older paths, once familiar, become something else, not forgotten entirely, but no longer lived. They exist only as possibilities, lines that could be followed, but are not, and in that way, they become part of the ocean's quiet structure, invisible corridors that have no traffic, open spaces that carry no movement, not because they were closed, but because nothing required them to remain open in practice. If you were to stand on the deck of a ship moving through one of these abandoned routes, there would be no clear moment when you realize it, no boundary you could point to, only a gradual awareness that something is different. Fewer signals, less presence, more distance between one point of reference and the next, and eventually a kind of stillness, not in the water, but in the pattern of movement around you, as if you have stepped slightly outside the main flow of the world, and behind you, far behind, the active routes continue, ships moving steadily along paths that connect one place to another, while here the path remains unchanged, unused, and quietly waiting, not to be rediscovered, but simply to exist as it is. SS Baychimo, the ship that refused to leave. Some ships are lost in a single moment, a storm, a collision, a sudden failure, and after that, there is only absence. But not all stories at sea end that way. Some continue quietly, without direction, long after the people have gone. In 1931, a cargo steamer named the SS Baychimo was traveling through the Arctic Ocean. It was not a large ship by modern standards, but it was built for its purpose, reinforced for cold conditions, designed to move through waters that were often difficult to navigate. Its journey that year was routine, carrying goods along northern routes used by trading companies operating in remote regions. These were not busy shipping lanes. They were seasonal paths, dependent on ice, on weather, on timing, and as autumn approached, those conditions began to change. The temperature dropped, ice started to form again across the surface of the water. At first, it was manageable, thin layers, breakable. The ship continued forward, but the Arctic does not change gradually in the way other places do. When winter returns, it does so with certainty. The ice thickens, it spreads, and movement becomes slower, more restricted. Eventually, the Baychimo became trapped, not violently, not with impact, but held in place, surrounded by ice that closed in from all sides. This was not unusual. Ships operating in these regions often experienced delays. They waited. They monitored the situation. They prepared to move again when conditions allowed. The crew remained on board. Supplies were rationed. Plans were adjusted. They expected the ice to shift, to open, to release the vessel back into navigable water. But as days passed, it became clear that this would not happen soon. The pressure of the ice began to increase, not enough to crush the ship immediately, but enough to create concern. Wood creaking, metal responding to slow, steady force, a kind of tension that did not disappear. Eventually, a decision was made. The crew would leave, not because the ship had failed, but because staying no longer made sense. They gathered what they could carry, essential supplies, personal belongings, and then, they stepped off the vessel onto the frozen surface that surrounded it. From there, they moved towards safety, leaving the Baychimo behind. At that moment, it was assumed that the ship's story had ended, that it would remain trapped until the ice destroyed it, or that it would sink once conditions changed. Either way, it was no longer part of any planned journey. But the Arctic does not always follow expectations. Shortly after the crew departed, a storm passed through the region. Winds shifted, pressure patterns changed, and the ice, which had held the ship in place, began to break apart. Not completely, but enough. When observers returned to check on the vessel, it was gone. Not destroyed, not sunk, simply absent. At first, this was not alarming. The assumption was simple. The ship had broken free and drifted away, uncontrolled, unmanned, carried by currents into the open ocean, and that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. In the months that followed, and then in the years after, the Baychimo was seen again, not once, but multiple times. Different locations, different observers, always the same description. A ship moving slowly through Arctic waters. No crew, no activity, just drifting. Some sightings placed it near the coast of Alaska. Others reported it farther out at sea. Sometimes it appeared partially trapped in ice again. Other times it moved freely, but always it was empty. There were attempts to board the vessel, to recover it, to tow it back to a place where it could be used again, but the conditions made that difficult. The ice returned, the weather shifted, and each time the opportunity passed, so the ship remained not anchored, not guided, just moving with the environment, year after year, decade after decade, becoming something unusual, not a wreck, not a functioning vessel, but something in between, a presence that continued without purpose. Eventually, it became known as a ghost ship, not because anything mysterious was happening on board, but because of what it represented, a ship that had been left behind and yet had not disappeared. The last confirmed sighting of the Baychimo was in 1969, nearly 40 years after it was abandoned. After that, nothing. No wreckage has been found. No final resting place has been confirmed. It is assumed that the ship eventually sank or broke apart under the pressure of ice and time, but there is no record of when that happened, no clear moment when the drifting stopped. And because of that, the story remains open, not unresolved in a dramatic way, just unfinished. A ship that existed between presence and absence for far longer than expected, and somewhere in the Arctic there may still be traces, fragments resting beneath the surface or scattered along distant shores, unmarked, unrecognized, quiet. The story of the Baychimo does not suggest danger. It does not warn against entering certain waters. Instead, it reveals something else, that once a ship leaves the system of routes, once it is no longer guided, no longer connected, it becomes part of the ocean itself, not immediately, but gradually. Its movement no longer determined by human intention, its path no longer tied to any destination, only currents, only wind, only time. And in that way, it enters a different kind of existence, not active, not complete, but continuing slowly, quietly, until eventually even that movement comes to an end and the ocean absorbs what remains, leaving behind only the idea that for a long time there was a ship that refused to disappear. SS Ourang Medan, the signal that ended in silence. There are moments at sea when everything feels normal, steady, predictable, quiet, and then, without warning, a signal appears. Not loud, not dramatic, just unexpected. In the late 1940s, a series of radio operators reportedly received one such signal. It came from a ship identified as the SS Ourang Medan. At first, it did not stand out. Ships communicate regularly, short messages, position updates, routine exchanges. But this one was different. The words were brief, fragmented, not structured. The way standard distress calls are usually sent, all officers, including Captain dead, lying in chart room and bridge. There was no clear explanation, no description of what had happened, only a statement, as if someone were observing the situation rather than experiencing it. The message continued, possibly whole crew dead, and then a pause, not long, but long enough to feel like something had changed. Then, dead, one final line, I die. After that, nothing, no follow-up, no clarification, only silence. In most cases, a distress signal is the beginning of a sequence. More messages follow, coordinates are repeated, conditions are described, other ships respond, a situation unfolds. But here, the sequence ended almost immediately. And that is what made it different. Nearby vessels reportedly changed course, moved toward the last known position, expecting to find a ship in distress, perhaps damaged, perhaps in need of assistance, something that could be approached, assessed, understood. But what they found, if the accounts are accurate, was something quieter, a ship that was still afloat, still intact, not visibly damaged, and yet not active. No signals, no movement, just a structure resting on the water. When boarding parties approached, what they encountered has been described in different ways. Some reports suggest that the crew was still on board, unmoving, positioned in places where they had last been working. The chart room, the bridge, areas where decisions are made, where navigation is controlled. But there was no indication of struggle, no clear sign of what had caused the situation, only stillness. Other accounts differ. Some suggest the ship was already empty, that whatever had happened left no visible trace of those who were there. And in some versions, before a full investigation could be completed, the situation changed again. A fire, sudden, unexpected, spreading quickly through the vessel, forcing those who had arrived to withdraw. and shortly after, an explosion, the ship sinking into the sea, leaving behind no structure to examine, no evidence to confirm what had been reported, only fragments of a story, messages recorded by those who heard them, accounts shared by those who claimed to respond, and a sequence of events that cannot be fully verified. Because of this, the story of the Ourang Medan remains uncertain. Some consider it a legend, a tale that developed over time, shaped by retelling, altered with each version. Others believe there may be a basis in reality, that a real ship, a real signal, a real event existed at the center of it, but that details were lost, distorted, or never fully recorded. And in a way, that uncertainty is part of what defines it, not as a mystery to be solved, but as a reflection of something else, the limits of what can be known at sea. Because even with communication, even with signals that travel across great distances, there are moments when information stops, when a message ends before it can be completed, when context is missing, and what remains is only a fragment. The ocean does not preserve those missing pieces. It does not hold onto explanations. It simply continues, water moving as it always does, covering what has happened without distinction. And the ships that pass through these regions, those that receive signals or expect them, understand something quietly, that not every message will have an answer. Not every situation will be resolved. Sometimes a transmission arrives and then ends without follow-up, without clarity, only a final line that remains long after everything else has faded. I die. Simple words, direct, unembellished, and because they stand alone, they carry a different weight, not because of what they describe, but because of what is missing, everything that should have come after. The explanation, the sequence, the conclusion, all absent, leaving behind a single moment of connection between one ship and the wider world, a moment that ended almost as soon as it began. And after that, silence, no signal returning, no structure remaining, only water, and somewhere within it, whatever truly happened, not hidden, not revealed, just beyond reach. And for those who travel the ocean, that possibility is understood not as something to fear, but as something that exists, a reminder that even in a connected world, there are still moments when a voice can appear, be heard, and then disappear completely. SS Edmund Fitzgerald. When even familiar waters turn quiet. Not all silence at sea belongs to distant places. Not all absence comes from isolation. Sometimes it happens in waters that are known, routes that are used every day, paths that feel familiar, journeys that have been completed again and again, places where nothing unusual is expected. And because of that, the change, when it comes, feels quieter. In 1975, a large cargo vessel named the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was traveling across Lake Superior. It was not alone in the region. Other ships moved along similar routes. The lake itself, though vast, was part of a system connected to industry, to transport, to routine movement. This was not open ocean, not an empty space between continents. It was a working route, active, used, understood. The Fitzgerald had made similar journeys before, carrying cargo, crossing the lake as part of a pattern that repeated Over time, nothing about the voyage suggested anything unusual, but the conditions began to change slowly. At first, wind increasing, waves building, the kind of shift that is monitored, not feared, because ships are built to withstand weather. Crews are trained to respond, and most storms, even strong ones, pass. The lake, though large, is still contained, bounded by land, mapped in detail. It does not carry the same sense of unpredictability as the open ocean, but water, regardless of where it is, follows its own rule. As the storm developed, conditions became more intense, waves rose higher, visibility decreased, communication continued, but with more effort. The Fitzgerald remained in contact with another vessel nearby, exchanging updates, sharing observations. Nothing in those messages suggested immediate danger, only awareness, adjustment, a response to changing conditions. At one point, a message was sent, simple, unremarkable. We are holding our own. It was not a distress call, not a warning, just a statement that everything was under control, that the ship was continuing. And then, either a short time later, communication stopped. No gradual fade, no sequence of escalating messages, just an end. The ship did not reach its destination. It did not send further updates. It did not signal distress. It simply was no longer there. Search efforts began. Conditions made it difficult. The storm continued to move across the lake. Time passed. Eventually, the wreck was found, resting on the lake bed, broken, separated into sections, evidence of a force that had acted quickly. But even with that discovery, the exact sequence of events remained unclear. There were theories: structural failure, water intake, wave impact, possibilities based on what was known, but no single explanation could be confirmed with certainty. And in a way, that uncertainty is part of the silence, because the route itself did not change dramatically. Ships still cross Lake Superior. They follow similar paths. They carry cargo as they always have. The lake remains active, connected, part of a system that continues to function. And yet, something is different. Not in the water, not in the charts, but in awareness, a recognition that even in familiar places, even along routes that are used regularly, there are moments when conditions align in ways that cannot be fully predicted. Moments when everything appears stable until it is not, and what follows is not always gradual, not always signaled in advance. Sometimes it is immediate, a shift from presence to absence, without transition, without explanation that can be fully traced. For those who travel these waters, this is understood in a quiet way, not as fear, but as respect and awareness. That familiarity does not remove uncertainty. That routine does not guarantee outcome, and that even in places where ships pass every day, there can be moments of complete stillness, moments when a vessel is no longer part of the movement, when its path ends, not at a port, but beneath the surface. And after that, the water continues, the waves settle, the wind shifts, the storm passes, and the route resumes. Ships move again along the same lines, following the same directions, crossing the same space, but beneath them, far below, something remains, not visible, not marked, only present. And over time, that presence becomes part of the place, not changing it, not altering the surface, but existing quietly within it a reminder not of danger but of reality. That water, whether ocean or lake, does not distinguish between familiar and unknown. It does not respond to expectation. It simply moves according to its nature, and sometimes that movement is enough to end a journey without warning, leaving behind only a moment, a final message, and a silence that follows. Not loud, not dramatic, just complete. Bermuda Triangle, between myth and routine. There are places on the ocean that are not empty, but are spoken about as if they are something else, not abandoned, not unused, but approached differently. The Bermuda Triangle is one of those places. It is not a precise location in the way a port is. There are no fixed boundaries marked in the water, no line you can cross that suddenly changes everything. Instead, it is a region, a broad area of the North Atlantic, defined loosely by 3 points: Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. Within that space, ships move, planes pass overhead, trade continues. Nothing about it is officially restricted, and yet it is rarely treated as just another part of the ocean, because over time, stories have gathered there. Accounts of disappearances, reports of unusual events, moments when vessels or aircraft failed to complete their journeys. Some of these accounts are well documented, others are uncertain, and many have been reinterpreted again and again until the line between event and story becomes less clear. But beneath all of that, beneath the layers of narrative, there is something simpler. The ocean in this region is complex. Weather patterns shift quickly. Storms can form with little warning. The Gulf Stream, a powerful current, moves through part of this area. Fast, warm, unpredictable at times. It can carry objects away from their last known position more quickly than expected, which means that if something is lost, if a ship or aircraft disappears, the evidence may not remain where it was last seen. It moves, and when things move without clear tracking, uncertainty grows. But even that is not unusual for the ocean. What makes this region different is not the presence of danger, but the accumulation of attention. Stories repeated, patterns suggested, connections drawn between events that may not actually be connected. And over time, that attention creates a kind of atmosphere, not in the air, but in perception. Sailors are aware of it. Pilots are aware of it. Even if they do not believe in anything unusual, they know the reputation, and that knowledge changes behavior in small ways. Routes are planned with a margin of caution, not large enough to be obvious, but present. Ships may pass along the edges of the region rather than directly through its center. Aircraft follow corridors that are well established. Communication is monitored closely. Weather is checked with care. None of this is unique to the Bermuda Triangle. It is standard practice in many parts of the world, but here the awareness feels more focused, more deliberate, not because something is expected to happen, but because of what has been said to have happened before. And so a pattern forms, not of absence, because ships still pass, but of avoidance, a subtle shifting of paths, a preference for known stability over uncertain space. And that shift, repeated over time, creates something familiar, not emptiness, but a thinning, fewer vessels, cars in certain parts of the region, less traffic in areas that are not part of the main routes, not because they are inaccessible, but because they are unnecessary and because there are alternatives. If a ship can reach its destination by moving slightly north or slightly south while maintaining a more predictable environment, it will choose that path, not out of fear, but out of efficiency, out of consistency. And so the center of the region remains less used than it could be, not empty, but quieter. If you were to travel through it without thinking about its reputation, you might not notice anything unusual. The water would move as it always does. The sky would change as weather systems pass. There would be moments of calm, moments of wind, nothing that stands out as different from other parts of the ocean. And that is important because it reminds us that the place itself is not defined by what is said about it. It exists as part of the same system as every other region of the sea. What changes is not the environment, but the way it is perceived, and perception over time influences behavior, even in subtle ways. Even when those who travel do not consciously acknowledge it, they adjust. They choose routes that feel more certain. They remain within patterns that have proven reliable, and in doing so, they leave behind small spaces that are less frequently used, not avoided entirely, but approached with less intention. And those spaces, like the gaps between shipping lanes, become quieter, not silent, but less defined by movement, less shaped by routine. And so, the Bermuda Triangle exists in two ways at once: as a physical place, a region of water with currents, weather, and depth, and as an idea, a collection of stories that have influenced how people move through it. Neither cancels the other. They overlap, creating a space that is both ordinary and noticed. And in that overlap, there is something subtle, a reminder that not all avoidance comes from danger. Sometimes it comes from attention, from the accumulation of small uncertainties, from the choice to move slightly differently than before. And over time, those choices reshape the map, not visibly, but in practice, leaving behind areas that are still part of the ocean, still accessible, but no longer central to the way we move across it. And in those areas, the water continues unchanged, unaffected by the stories above it, holding its own rhythm, while the world around it moves just a little to the side. Devil's Sea, where the ocean moves differently. If the Atlantic holds places shaped by stories, then the Pacific holds places shaped by the earth itself. Off the eastern coast of Japan, there is a region of ocean sometimes referred to as the Devil's Sea. Like the Bermuda Triangle, it is not defined by exact boundaries. There are no lines on the water, no markers that separate it from the surrounding ocean. And yet, those who travel these waters recognize that something here feels different. Not in a dramatic way, not constantly, but in patterns that repeat over time. To understand that feeling, you have to look beneath the surface, far below the waves. The ocean floor is not still, it is active. The region lies near a complex boundary of tectonic plates, sections of the Earth's crust moving slowly but continuously, pressing, shifting, releasing energy in ways that are rarely visible from above. In some places, this movement forms underwater volcanoes, structures that rise from the seabed. Some remain dormant for long periods, others become active, releasing gas, heat, and material into the surrounding water. Most of this activity goes unnoticed at the surface, but not always. There are moments when the effects reach upward, subtle changes in the water, disturbances that do not follow the usual patterns of waves or currents, areas where the sea appears unsettled, even in otherwise calm conditions. These are not constant. They do not define the region every day, but they happen often enough to be remembered, and memory in navigation becomes guidance. Sailors learn not only from instruments, but from experience, from what has been observed before, from what has been passed down through time. Stories of waters that behaved differently, places where conditions shifted without clear warning, and over time, those stories form a kind of quiet map, not drawn on paper, but carried in awareness. Fishing vessels still operate near this region. They follow known patterns, stay within areas that are familiar, but beyond those edges, there are fewer reasons to continue. No major route that require crossing through the center. No destinations that depend on passing directly across it. And so, movement adjusts, not completely away, but around a curve in the path, a slight shift that avoids uncertainty. And that shift, repeated again and again, creates space, not empty, in the way of distant oceans, but less used, less defined by regular passage. There is also another element, less visible, but just as important. Gas. In certain conditions, gases can rise from the seabed into the water above. Methane, I'm quiet, or other trapped gases released by geological activity. When this happens, it can change the properties of the water itself. Not dramatically, not in a way that can be seen easily, but enough. You see the Rhine Sea to affect buoyancy. Water mixed with gas is slightly less dense, and for a vessel moving through that area, that difference, though small, can alter stability. These events are rare, localized, but they are part of the environment, part of what makes this region less predictable. Again, not dangerous in a constant sense, but uncertain, and uncertainty, as always, leads to adjustment. Ships prefer consistency, predictable conditions, reliable movement, and when a region does not offer that, even occasionally, it becomes less central to navigation, not avoided entirely, but approached with awareness and often left to the side. If you were to travel through this region, you might not notice anything at first. The ocean would appear as it does elsewhere, waves rising and falling, wind moving across the surface. But then, perhaps a moment, a change that does not follow expectation, water that feels unsettled without a visible cause, a shift that cannot be easily explained in the moment, not dramatic, not alarming, just different. And then it passes. The surface returns to its usual rhythm. The movement continues, but the memory of that moment remains. And over time, those moments accumulate, not into fear, but into caution, into a preference for routes that do not require passing directly through such areas. And so, like other places on the ocean, the Devil's Sea becomes something subtle, not empty, not abandoned, but less used than it could be. A region where the Earth's activity meets the surface in ways that are not always visible, but are still felt. And above it all, the ocean continues, unconcerned with the movements below, waves forming, currents shifting, light reflecting, while beneath, slow changes unfold, unseen, unheard, and quietly shaping how the surface above is experienced, not every time, not everywhere, but enough to leave an impression, enough to influence movement, and enough to create a space that remains not empty, but different. A place where the ocean does not behave in quite the same way, and where, because of that, ships choose gently, quietly, to pass just a little further away. The zone where signals fade. For most of modern history, the ocean has never truly been silent. Even in the most remote regions, ships remain connected. Signals move invisibly through the air and space above, linking vessel to vessel, ship to satellite, crew to the wider world. Position, weather, communication, all of it flows continuously, or at least that is how it feels, because connection today is not something we notice. It is something we expect, a constant presence in the background, so constant that when it changes, even slightly, it becomes noticeable, not as an event, but as an absence. There are places on the ocean where that connection is not as stable, not gone, not completely lost, but less certain. Moments when a signal takes longer to arrive, when a position update lags behind by a few seconds more than usual, when the clarity of communication softens just enough to be felt. These are not failures, they are variations, small disruptions caused by many factors: atmospheric conditions, solar activity, distance from satellites, the angle at which signals travel between systems. Most of the time, these variations are minor, barely noticeable, corrected quickly by the systems in place. But when you are at sea, far from land, far from other vessels, even small changes take on a different weight, because connection is not just about information. It is about presence, knowing that others are there, knowing that if something happens, communication can be established without delay. And when that certainty becomes less stable, even for a moment, the experience shifts. On the bridge of a ship, the environment is controlled. Screens display position, radar shows nearby objects, communication channels remain open. Everything appears steady, but then a brief interruption, a signal drops, a screen refreshes slightly slower than expected, a transmission breaks for a fraction of a second. Nothing serious, nothing that requires action, and yet it is noticed, not because it changes the course, but because it changes the rhythm. The smooth flow of information is no longer continuous. It pauses just for a moment, and in that pause, something becomes clear: that the connection is not absolute. It depends on conditions, on systems that extend far beyond the ship itself. And in certain regions, those conditions are less stable, not unreliable, but not perfect. And so, over time, these regions become known, not formally mapped, not labeled as areas to avoid, but understood as places where connection may not feel as strong, where signals may take longer, where communication may require just a little more attention. And as always, that understanding leads to adjustment. Ships do not abandon these areas completely, but they adapt. routes shift slightly. Paths are chosen to maintain more consistent connection, to stay within regions where systems perform as expected. Because in navigation, consistency matters, not perfection, but predictability, knowing that the system will behave in a certain way. And when that predictability is reduced even slightly, it becomes a factor, a reason to move just a little to one side. And those small movements, repeated over time, create space, not empty space in the physical sense, but space in the pattern of movement. Areas that are crossed less often, not because they are inaccessible, but because they are not preferred. If you were to pass through such a region, you might not notice anything at first. The ship would continue as always. Systems would function. Navigation would remain accurate. But then, perhaps a moment, a delay, a signal that does not arrive exactly when expected, a brief gap in communication, and then everything resumed normal, stable, as if nothing happened. But the moment remains, not as a problem, but as an awareness, a subtle reminder that connection is not something fixed, it is something maintained. And in certain places, that maintenance is more visible because it is not perfect. At night, this awareness can feel stronger. The horizon disappears, the sky darkens, visual references fade, and what remains is the system, the instruments, the signals, the invisible network that keeps everything aligned. So when that network hesitates, even briefly, the silence feels deeper, not because it is truly silent, but because the expectation of continuity has been interrupted. And in that interruption, the ocean feels just a little more distant, not physically, but in connection, as if the space around you has expanded by a small, almost unmeasurable amount. And that expansion is enough to be noticed, not feared, not resisted, just acknowledged. And over time, that acknowledgement becomes part of navigation, part of the quiet decisions that shape movement across the sea, routes that favor stable connection, paths that maintain consistent communication, leaving behind small regions where signals may fade, not completely, but just enough to change the experience. And those regions remain part of the ocean, unmarked, unchanged, existing within the same system, but not fully integrated into its most reliable paths, a place where connection is still present but not absolute, and where, for a brief moment, a ship may feel just a little more alone than it did before. South Atlantic anomaly, when even space notices. There are places on Earth that are not defined by what you can see. No change in the water, no shift in the wind, no visible boundary that tells you something is different. And yet, something is. The South Atlantic anomaly is one of those places. It stretches across a large region of the South Atlantic Ocean, from the eastern coast of South America toward parts of southern Africa. At the surface, it appears like any other part of the ocean. Ships pass through it. Waves move as they always do. There is no indication that anything unusual is happening, but above it, far above, the environment changes. To understand this place, you have to look beyond the ocean, beyond the atmosphere, to something that surrounds the entire planet. The Earth's magnetic field, an invisible structure that extends outward into space. It protects the planet from charged particles coming from the sun, deflecting them, guiding them, creating a kind of shield that allows life to exist without constant exposure to high levels of radiation. This field is not perfectly uniform. It shifts, it varies, and in the region known as the South Atlantic anomaly, it becomes weaker, not dramatically weaker in a way that affects everyday life at the surface, but enough to be noticed by systems that operate above. Satellites passing over this region experience changes, not in their path, but in their environment. Increased exposure to energetic particles, conditions that can interfere with sensitive instruments, cause temporary glitches, small disruptions in electronic systems. Because of this, space agencies are aware of the anomaly. They monitor it, adjust operations when passing through, sometimes powering down certain instruments to prevent damage, not as a response to danger, but as a precaution, a recognition that in this region, conditions are slightly different, and that difference, though invisible, is real. Down at sea level, those effects are minimal. Ships do not experience direct interference in the same way. Navigation systems continue to function. Communication remains intact. To those on the water, there is no obvious sign that anything has changed. And yet, the knowledge of this place adds another layer to the way the ocean is understood, because it reminds us that the ocean is not isolated. It is not separate from the rest of the planet. It exists within a larger system, connected to forces that extend far beyond its surface. The movement of the Earth's core, the structure of its magnetic field, the interaction between planet and space, all of it influences what happens below, even if those influences are not always visible. For those navigating these waters, the South Atlantic anomaly is not something that requires avoidance. Ships continue to pass through. Routes are not significantly altered, but the region remains noticed, not in the same way as places shaped by storms or currents, but as a point of awareness, a reminder that not everything that matters can be seen. If you were traveling here, standing on the deck of a ship, crossing this part of the ocean, you would see nothing unusual. The horizon would stretch as it always does. The sky would move from day to night. Waves would rise and fall with steady rhythm. Everything would feel completely normal. And above you, unseen, satellites would pass, adjusting, compensating, responding to conditions that you cannot feel. That contrast is quiet but meaningful, because it reveals a difference between perception and reality. What is experienced at one level may not reflect what is happening at another, and in that difference, there is a kind of depth, not physical depth, though the ocean itself is deep, but conceptual, a sense that the world is layered, that beneath the surface of experience, there are systems operating continuously, shaping conditions, influencing outcomes, without drawing attention to themselves. The South Atlantic anomaly is one of those systems, a place where the invisible becomes slightly more active, where the balance that exists elsewhere is adjusted just enough to be measured, and because of that, it becomes part of how the ocean is understood, not as a barrier, not as a danger, but as a variation, a subtle shift in the structure of the world. And like other places we have moved through, it contributes to the pattern, to the way ships travel, to the way routes are chosen, not always directly, not always consciously, but as part of a larger awareness that the ocean is not uniform, not completely stable. It contains regions where conditions change, where forces interact in ways that are not always visible. And in those regions, movement adjusts slightly, quietly, creating spaces that feel different, even if they appear the same. And so, the South Atlantic anomaly exists, not marked on most maps, used by those at sea, not visible to the eye, but present, a reminder that even in the most open places, even in the vastness of the ocean, there are subtle variations that shape the way the world moves, above, below, and everywhere in between, unseen, unspoken, but always there. Sable Island, the island that watches ships disappear. Not all places of silence are far from everything. Some of them sit directly in the path of movement where ships once passed and sometimes did not continue. Sable Island is one of those places. It lies in the North Atlantic, off the coast of Canada, a long, narrow strip of sand surrounded by open water. From above, it looks almost fragile, a thin shape resting lightly on the surface of the ocean. But what makes it different is not its size, it is its position. Sable Island sits near the edge of major Atlantic routes, not directly in the busiest lanes, but close enough that ships have passed near it for centuries. And for much of that time, navigation was not precise. There were no satellites, no real-time positioning systems, only compass headings, stars, and estimates based on speed and direction. In such conditions, a small error could become something larger, a slight deviation from course, a shift caused by current, a misjudgment of distance. And over time, those small differences could lead a ship closer and closer to a place that was difficult to see, because Sable Island does not rise sharply from the sea. It does not announce itself with cliffs or rock formations. Instead, it is surrounded by shallow sandbars extending outward beneath the surface, invisible to those approaching, especially in fog. And fog is common here, thick, persistent, reducing visibility to almost nothing. A ship moving through these waters might not see the island at all until it was too late. At first, the signs would be subtle, a change in the motion of the vessel, a resistance that was not there before. Then a slowing, a stop, not from impact, but from grounding, the hull resting on sand, held in place by something that does not move. At that moment, the journey changes. The ship is no longer traveling. It is no longer part of any route. It has become fixed. In earlier time, this was difficult to resolve. Without powerful engines, without external assistance, freeing a grounded ship could take time, and time in such conditions was uncertain. Storms could arrive, waves could increase, the structure of the ship could weaken, and what began as a moment of grounding could become something else, a loss over the centuries. Many ships met this kind of end around Sable Island, not in a single event, not from a single cause, but through repetition, small errors, limited visibility, unforgiving geography, each one contributing to the same outcome. More than 350 shipwrecks have been recorded in the surrounding area, some well documented, others known only through fragments of information, remains discovered later, pieces of wood washed ashore, metal structures emerging from the sand, and over time, the island became known by another name, the Graveyard of the Atlantic, not because of any dramatic event, but because of accumulation, many separate moments forming a pattern. And yet, if you visit the island today, if you walk along its length, it does not feel like a place defined by loss. It feels quiet, open, wind moving across dunes, grass bending with steady rhythm, wild horses moving slowly across the landscape, unaware of what lies beneath or along the edges, because time has changed the surface. Ships that once stood above the water are now broken, buried partially in sand, reduced to fragments, a section of hull, a curve of metal, an outline that suggests what was once complete but does not fully reveal it. The ocean, working with wind and current, has softened everything, edges worn down, shapes altered, until what remains blends into the environment, part of the island now, not separate from it. And above all of this, there is stillness, no constant flow of visitors, no crowds moving from place to place, only occasional presence, researchers, caretakers, those who arrive with purpose, but not in numbers, that change the atmosphere. For the most part, the island remains as it is, a place where movement slowed and then stopped, not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually, ship by ship, year by year, until the pattern became clear and navigation improved, technology advanced, routes adjusted. Ships now pass at safer distances with precise awareness of their position. The risk remains, but it is reduced, managed, and because of that, the number of incidents has decreased. The island no longer receives ships in the same way. It remains in the path, but no longer part of the journey, and so its role has changed from an obstacle within movement to a place that holds what has already happened, a quiet record of moments that did not continue. If you stand at the edge of the water there, looking out toward the opened Atlantic, you would see nothing unusual, just waves, just horizon, ships passing far in the distance, following route that no longer come close. And beneath the surface, along the shoreline, within the sand, there are traces, not clearly visible, not fully preserved, but present, reminders that this place was once part of many journeys, and that, for some of them, it became the end, not marked by noise, not defined by impact, but by stillness, a gradual transition from movement to rest, held in place by something simple, sand, fog, distance, and time, until everything that once passed through became part of the silence that remains. Bikini Atoll, the lagoon beneath the surface. Not all places where things were left behind began with accident. Some were chosen, selected carefully, prepared in advance, used with intention. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, far from major routes, there is a ring of islands surrounding a quiet lagoon, Bikini Atoll. From above, it appears almost peaceful. Clear water, soft light, a horizon that feels distant but calm. Nothing about it suggests disruption. Nothing on the surface reveals what lies below, because what remains here is not visible from where the sky meets the sea. It rests beneath, deep enough to be hidden, shallow enough to still exist as structure. In the mid-20th century, this place was used for a purpose that did not belong to the ocean a series of tests, not of navigation, not of exploration, but of force. Before those tests began, ships were brought into the lagoon, not one or two, but many warships, support vessels, large structures that once moved across the ocean with direction and command. They were positioned deliberately, anchored, arranged, not for travel, but for observation, to measure what would happen to them, to see how they would respond to what was coming. At that moment, they were still ships, functional in structure, recognizable in form, even if they were no longer in active use. Then the tests began. Energy released on a scale that does not belong to natural ocean movement. Light, heat, force, all arriving at once. The water responded, surface rising, pressure spreading outward, structures absorbing what they could and then changing. Some ships were destroyed immediately, broken, displaced. Others remained intact for a time, damaged but still present, floating after the event, but not for long, because what had changed was not only the moment of impact, it was the condition of everything that remained. Over time, those ships began to sink, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, taking on water, losing balance, settling into the lagoon below until they reached the seabed. And there they stayed, not removed, not recovered, left in place as they were, or as they had become. And with that, the lagoon changed, not at the surface, where the water continued to move gently, but below, where an entire collection of vessels now rested, not as a fleet in motion, but as something else, a still arrangement of structures that once had purpose. Now, VITO. Without it, over time, the ocean began to respond in its own way, not through removal, but through integration. Coral began to grow along surfaces, edges softened, metal structures became part of a different environment. Fish moved through open spaces, water passed through corridors that once carried people. The ships did not disappear, but they changed slowly, becoming less defined by their original form and more defined by their presence within the water. Today, the lagoon holds one of the most unusual collections beneath the ocean surface, not because it is hidden, but because it is still. Entire vessels resting where they sank, some upright, some tilted, all quiet, no movement, no activity, just structure preserved in a way that is not intentional, but is sustained by the environment. Divers sometimes visit, carefully observing what remains, moving slowly through spaces that were not meant to be still. But even then, the presence is temporary. The water returns to its usual state once they leave, and for the most part, the lagoon remains undisturbed. No ships anchor above it for regular activity. No routes pass directly through with purpose, not because it is inaccessible, but because there is nothing to be done there, nothing to transport, nothing to build, only what remains. And what remains is complete in itself, a place where movement ended, not by accident, but by design, and where the ocean has taken over what was left behind. If you were to pass above this lagoon without knowing what lies beneath, you would see only water, clear, calm, perhaps even inviting. Nothing to suggest that below the surface there are ships resting in silence, that the stillness you are looking at extends downward through layers of water to structures that no longer move, And that contrast is what defines this place. Not destruction, not even history, but quiet, a kind of quiet that follows after something has happened, when there is no longer any need to act, no further purpose to fulfill, only presence, held in place by depth, by water, by time. And above it all, the ocean continues as it always does, waves forming, light shifting, unaffected by what lies beneath, because the ocean does not separate what is above from what is below. It holds both in the same way, without distinction, without emphasis, allowing what remains to stay, not as a reminder, not as a warning, but simply as part of the stillness that exists when movement ends. Chuuk Lagoon, the fleet that never sailed again. If Bikini Atoll is a place where ships were brought to an ending, then Chuuk Lagoon is a place where ships arrived and never left. It lies in the Western Pacific, far from the main movement of modern trade, a wide lagoon protected by a ring of islands, calm water, sheltered, a place that at one time was not quiet at all. During the early 20th century, and especially during the years of global conflict, Chuuk Lagoon, then known as Chuuk, was one of the most important naval bases in the Pacific. Ships moved in and out regularly, supplies were stored, fuel was transferred, aircraft used the surrounding areas to land and depart. It was not isolated, it was active, a center of coordination in a much larger system. Movement defined the place. Purpose shaped everything. Each vessel that entered the lagoon had a role, a destination beyond it, a task to complete. And for a time, that movement continued, steady, organized, until in 1944, something changed, not gradually, not through small adjustments over time, but quickly. Aircraft arrived from a distance. Operations were carried out. Strikes were focused on the ships within the lagoon, and in a short span of time, the pattern of movement was interrupted, not reduced, not redirected, stopped. Vessels that had been anchored were no longer able to move. Some sank quickly, others took longer, but one by one they settled downward through water that had once carried them in motion into a space where movement no longer applied. Along with them, what they carried also remained: vehicles, equipment, supplies, everything that had been part of an active system became still. And once the event ended, once the moment passed, the lagoon did not return to what it had been, because what had changed was not only the presence of ships, it was their condition. They were no longer part of a network, no longer connected to routes or destinations. They had become fixed, resting on the seabed at different depths, in different positions, but all sharing the same stillness. In the years that followed, the ocean began to respond, not by removing what was there, but by slowly changing its relationship to it. Water moved through structures. Sediment settled. Surfaces softened. Coral began to grow, not rapidly, not dramatically, but steadily, covering edges, tracing outlines, blending form with environment. Fish moved through open spaces. Small organisms found places to exist, and over time, the lagoon transformed, not into something new, but into something integrated. The ships remained recognizable, their shapes still clear, their structures still present, but they were no longer separate from the water around them. They had become part of it. Today, Chuuk Lagoon holds one of the largest collections of shipwrecks in a single place, not scattered across distance, but gathered within a contained space. A fleet that did not disperse, that did not continue, that remained exactly where it was when movement ended. Divers sometimes visit. They move slowly through the water, entering spaces that were once active, passing through corridors where people once worked, observing objects that have not been moved for decades. But even in those moments, there is no sense of activity, only presence. The structures do not respond. They do not shift. They simply remain. And once the divers leave, the lagoon returns to its usual state, quiet, still, unchanged. Ships no longer gather here in the way they once did. Routes have shifted, purposes have changed. The lagoon is no longer part of an active system. It is not needed for movement, and because of that, it has become something else, a place where motion ended and was not resumed. If you pass above it without knowing its history, you would see nothing unusual. The surface is calm. Light moves across the water in familiar patterns. The horizon remains steady. Nothing suggests that below there is an entire fleet at rest, and yet that fleet remains, not hidden in the sense of being concealed, but unseen, because it lies beyond what is immediately visible, and that is what defines this place. Not what happened, not even what remains, but the contrast between movement and stillness, between what once was active and what is now completely quiet. A place that did not empty over time, but became still in a single moment and has remained that way ever since. Held in place by water, by depth, by time, without change, without continuation, only presence. A fleet that never sailed again, not because it was forgotten, but because its journey ended. Wani Pthog, exactly where it stood. The harbors that fell silent. Not all places where things were left behind are far from people. Some of them are close, so close that you could stand there on solid ground and look out at the water without realize what has changed, because what defines them is not distance, it is absence. There are harbors along coastlines all over the world that were once part of something active, places where ships arrived daily, where cargo was moved from deck to dock, where voices carried across the water, orders given, lines secured, engines idling as journeys paused before beginning again. These were not quiet places. They were designed for movement, for exchange, for connection between land and sea. And for a long time, they fulfilled that purpose. Ships followed routes that ended there. Goods passed through. People came and went. Everything had direction. Everything had a role. But over time, that role changed. Not because the harbor failed, not because the sea withdrew from it, but because the world around it shifted. Trade routes adjusted. Larger ports were built. New infrastructure allowed ships to move more efficiently elsewhere, and gradually the number of arrivals decreased. Not suddenly at first, it was just a little less activity. Fewer ships in a given week, then fewer still. Warehouses that once filled quickly began to hold space. Schedules changed. Gaps appeared between movements, and eventually the pattern stopped. No official closure, no clear moment, when everything ended, just a gradual transition from movement to stillness. The docks remained. The structures stood. Nothing was removed because nothing needed to be. There was no event that required clearing, no damage that demanded rebuilding, only absence. And absence does not require action. So the harbor stayed unchanged in form, but no longer active. Wooden piers began to age, boards shifting slightly under weather, metal structures responding slowly to air and salt, rust forming in places that were once maintained, ropes hanging without tension, no longer tied to vessels that would return. The water continued to move as it always had, waves touching the edges of the docks, rising and falling with the tide, unaware that nothing now responded to it. No hull pressing against it, no engine disturbing its surface, only contact without purpose. And over time, the silence settled in, not as something sudden, but as something that deepened day after day, without interruption, without variation. Where once there had been rhythm, I've Wani, arrivals and departures, there was now continuity. The same sound of water, the same movement of air, no change to mark time passing. If you stand in such a place today, you might notice how complete that silence feels. Not empty in a physical sense. The structures are still there, the shapes remain, but there is no function, no activity to give those shapes meaning. And without that, they become something else. Not tools, not parts of a system, but objects that exist on their own. A dock that leads nowhere, a building that stores nothing, a harbor that receives no one. And yet, there is no urgency to change it, no pressure to restore what once was, because the need has passed. The routes that led here have moved. Ships follow different paths now. Ports elsewhere handle the flow that once passed through. And so this place, once connected to a larger network, is no longer part of it. Not because it was removed, but because it was left behind. What remains is not loss, not in the dramatic sense, but stillness, a kind of quiet that follows when purpose is no longer required. In some cases, small traces of life return, not the same as before, not structured around movement, but present. A single boat, occasionally tied to a dock, a person walking along the edge, moments that appear briefly and then pass, but they do not change the overall feeling. They do not restore what once was. They simply exist within it because the harbor has shifted from a place of connection to a place of memory, not in the sense of remembering events, but in the sense of holding form. Structures that remain after their purpose has ended. If you look out from such a harbor toward the open sea, you will still see movement. Ships in the distance, following routes that continue. The network still exists. It has not disappeared. It has only changed, moved slightly, adjusted to new conditions. And this place, this harbor, sits just outside that movement now, close enough to see it, but no longer part of it. And that position creates a different kind of space, not isolated, not remote, but separate, a place where time feels less directed, where nothing needs to begin or end, only remain. And in that remaining, there is something quiet, something that does not demand attention, something that does not require understanding, only presence. A harbor that once held movement, now holding stillness, not as an absence to be filled, but as a condition that has settled in gently, completely, and without any need to change. The night with no nearby ships. There are nights at sea when everything continues exactly as expected. The engines maintain a steady rhythm. The course is set long before the sun goes down. Instruments glow softly on the bridge. Numbers update. Coordinates shift. Everything moves forward in quiet precision. And at first, nothing feels different. The sky darkens slowly. Light fades from the horizon until the line between sea and sky begins to soften. Stars appear one at a time until the space above is filled with them. It is a familiar transition, one that repeats night after night. But then, without any clear moment of change, you begin to notice something. You look outward across the surface of the water, and there are no lights, not near, not far, no distant glow from another vessel moving along a parallel path, no blinking signals marking position, no indication that anything else is out there. In most parts of the ocean, even at great distances, you expect to see something, a faint point of light on the horizon, a slow-moving shape barely visible against the darkness, a reminder that the ocean, though vast, is still shared. But on some nights, that expectation is not met. There is nothing, only darkness, extending in every direction. At first, it feels like a small detail, something you notice and then forget, because the ship continues. The environment remains stable. Nothing has changed in terms of operation. But if you keep looking, if you allow your eyes to adjust to the dark, the absence becomes clearer. Not just the lack of ships, but the lack of reference. No fixed point to measure distance, no movement to compare against your own. The horizon becomes less defined. The surface of the water merges with the sky, and in that merging, the sense of scale begins to shift. The ocean does not become larger. It always was, but without reference. It feels less contained, less structured, as if the boundaries that usually defined space have been removed. And in that space, your awareness changes. Not dramatically, not in a way that demands attention, but subtly. You become more aware of the ship itself, the sound of the engines, the slight vibration through the deck, the movement of the vessel as it passes over water you cannot fully see. These details were always present, but now, without external reference, they stand out more clearly because they are the only things that confirm movement, the only signals that something is happening. Everything else, the sea, the sky, feels still, even though it is not. Time also changes in a quiet way, without visual markers, without passing ships or shifting points of light. It becomes harder to measure its passage. Minutes feel longer, not in a heavy sense, but in a stretched one, as if each moment extends slightly beyond its usual length. The ship continues forward, but the journey feels less segmented, less defined by stages, only continuous. And in that continuity, a kind of calm emerges, not because the environment has become peaceful, but because it is uninterrupted. There is nothing to break the rhythm, nothing to demand. A shift in attention, only movement, steady, unchanging, and presence. You stand there, looking out into the dark, and realize something that is not often considered. That for this moment, you are alone, not in the absolute sense. There are other ships somewhere, other people moving across the ocean, but not here, not within sight, not within reach. And that distance, though measurable in kilometers, is felt as something else, a separation from the pattern, a step outside the network of movement that usually defines the sea. It is not isolating in a negative way. There is no urgency, no sense that something is missing, only a recognition that this part of the ocean is not currently shared, that your ship is the only presence within this space, and that presence is temporary because eventually you will move forward. You will cross into another region, another route where lights will appear again, where signals will return, where the network resumes. But for now, in this moment, there is only this: the ship, the water, the sky, and the quiet that surrounds all three. If you remain long enough, even that awareness begins to soften. The idea of being alone fades into something simpler, just being present within a space that does not require anything. No response, no action, only continuation. The engines move, the ship advances, the ocean remains unchanged by your presence, unaware of your passage, and above, the stars continue their own movement, slow, distant, unconnected to what happens below. It is a moment that does not demand to be remembered, but often is, because it reveals something quietly, that beyond the routes, beyond the systems, beyond the constant movement, there are still spaces where nothing happens, where no one passes, and where, for a brief time, you move through the ocean without being part of anything else. Just a single vessel crossing a wide, unmarked expanse of night. The sound of water against the hull. When there is nothing left to look at, no lights on the horizon, no movement in the distance, your attention begins to shift, not outward, but inward, toward the ship itself, toward the small details that are always present, but rarely noticed. And among those details, one becomes constant: the sound of water against the hull. At first, it is easy to overlook, just a background noise, soft, repetitive, blending into everything else that defines the environment. But as the night deepens, as the visual world fades into darkness, that sound becomes clearer, more distinct, not louder, but more noticeable, because there is less to compete with it. The ocean does not strike the ship with force most of the time. It touches it gently, wave after wave, meeting the side of the vessel with a steady rhythm, a low, continuous motion, not sharp, not sudden, just present. If you listen closely, you begin to notice that it is not a single sound. It changes subtly. Each wave arrives with a slightly different form, a variation in timing, in texture, sometimes smoother, sometimes more pronounced, but always returning to the same pattern: contact, then release, again and again. Over time, your mind begins to follow that rhythm, not actively, not with effort, but naturally, because repetition has a way of drawing attention without demanding it. And as that happens, the sound begins to feel less like noise and more like structure, a framework that holds the moment together, something that continues whether you focus on it or not. On land, sound is rarely this consistent. There are interruptions, voices, machines, sudden changes that shift your attention. But here, the sound remains unbroken, extending through time without pause. And in that continuity, something changes. Your sense of pace. The world begins to slow, not physically. The ship continues at the same speed. The ocean moves as it always does. But your perception adjusts because there is nothing to accelerate it, nothing to divide time into smaller pieces. Only this, a steady sequence of contact and release. The hull moving through water, the water responding, and that exchange repeating endlessly. If you stand close enough, you can feel it as well. A faint vibration through the structure of the ship, not strong, not disruptive, just a subtle confirmation that the vessel is in motion, that it is interacting with something beyond itself. And that interaction is continuous, never fully stopping, never fully changing, just flowing. At some point, you stop hearing individual waves. They blend together, becoming something whole, a single, extended sound, like breathing, like a slow, even pulse. And once that happens, it becomes easier to let go of everything else, because the sound does not require attention. It does not ask to be understood. It simply exists, providing a kind of background that is steady enough to hold your awareness without engaging it. This is why, for many who spend time at sea, the sound of water becomes something familiar, not just as an environmental detail, but as a condition, a constant that defines the experience. And when it is present in this way, unbroken, unchanging, it creates a space where thought begins to soften, not disappear, but lose its urgency. Ideas come and go without needing to be followed. Questions appear without needing answers, because there is no interruption that forces resolution. Only the steady movement of sound, and time continues within it. Minutes pass, then longer, but without clear markers. Those moments begin to merge. You are no longer counting, no longer measuring, only existing within the flow. The ship continues forward, the water continues to meet it, and the sound remains unaltered by distance, unaffected by direction, always the same and always slightly different. And in that balance, there is something calming, not because it is designed to be, but because it removes everything that is not necessary, leaving behind only the simplest form of movement: water, structure, contact, repeating without end. If the engines were to stop, if the ship were to drift, the sound would change, less defined, more irregular, but still present, because the ocean does not stop interacting with what touches it. It continues in all conditions, at all times. And that continuity is what you hear, not the ship itself, not the water alone, but the relationship between the two, a quiet exchange that defines the entire experience. And as you listen, without effort, without intention, that exchange becomes the only thing that matters in the moment. Everything else, the distance, the direction, the purpose of the journey, fades into the background, leaving only sound, steady, endless, and calm. When the horizon disappears, there are moments at sea when the horizon is always there, a clear line separating water from sky. Even at great distances, even in changing weather, it remains a reference point, a quiet boundary that tells you where one thing ends and another begins. It gives structure to everything you see, Distance can be measured, direction can be understood. The world feels organized, but sometimes that line disappears. Not suddenly, not in a way that demands attention, but gradually. Fog can do this. It moves slowly across the surface of the water, soft at first, barely noticeable. A slight reduction in clarity. The edges of distant objects become less defined. Then those objects fade. Lights disappear. Shapes dissolve until there is nothing left to anchor your view. The horizon, which once stretched clearly from one side of the world to the other, is no longer visible. It has not moved. It has not changed, but it cannot be seen. And without it, something subtle begins to shift. At first, your eyes search for it, looking outward, trying to find the line again, expecting it to reappear, but it doesn't. The fog thickens, or the darkness deepens, and the space around you becomes uniform. Sky and sea merge into one. No separation, no contrast, just a continuous field of soft gray or deep black. And in that field, distance becomes uncertain. There is no way to tell how far the water extends. No marker to measure depth of view. Everything feels closer and farther at the same time. The mind, used to structure, tries to compensate. It imagines the horizon, places it where it expects it to be. But without confirmation, that placement remains uncertain. And so the sense of space begins to change, not dramatically, but enough to be felt. The world becomes softer, edges dissolve, boundaries fade. And in that softness, the ocean feels different, not larger in size, but less defined, as if it extends without limit, because there is nothing to suggest otherwise. On the ship, everything continues. Instruments provide position. Direction remains steady. Movement is constant. Nothing has changed in terms of navigation, but perception is no longer supported by what you can see, only by what you know. And that difference between seeing and knowing creates a quiet tension, not discomfort, not fear, just awareness that the world is still there, but not visible. If the fog is thick enough, even the water, just a short distance away, begins to fade. The ship appears to move through something that is not entirely clear, not empty, but undefined. And in that environment, sound changes as well. It becomes softer, more contained, carried differently through the air without open distance to travel across. It remains close. The sound of water against the hull feels nearer, more immediate, as if the space around it has narrowed, even though it has not. Time again begins to shift without visual reference. Moments become harder to separate. There is no horizon to watch, no distant movement to follow, only the continuation of the present. And in that continuation, your awareness settles differently, less outward, more inward, focused on what is close, what is certain, the structure of the ship, the sound of motion, the steady presence of something solid beneath your feet. Everything beyond that becomes unclear, but not in a negative way, just undefined. And in that undefined space, the ocean feels more complete, not because you see more of it, but because you cannot separate it into parts. Sky and sea are no longer distinct. They are a single presence, extending in all directions, without boundary, without interruption. And that continuity has its own kind of calm, because without edges, there is nothing to reach, no distance to measure, no point to move toward. not only movement itself. The ship continues forward through space but offers no visual resistance, no indication of progress, only the quiet certainty that movement is happening, even if it cannot be seen. If the fog begins to lift slowly, as it often does, the horizon will return, first as a suggestion, a faint line emerging from the uniform field, then more clearly separating sky from sea once again. And with that, structure returns, distance becomes measurable, the world regains its edges. But for the time that the horizon is gone, the experience is different. Not because the ocean changes, but because perception does. And in that shift, there is a kind of stillness, not in the water, not in the movement, but in the way everything is held together, without lines, without limits, just presence, extending quietly in every direction at once. The ocean does not notice. After enough time at sea, after moving through empty routes, silent regions, places where nothing happens, a quiet understanding begins to settle in, not all at once, not as a thought, but arrives clearly, but gradually, as something you begin to feel more than explain. The ocean does not notice that you are there. At first, this idea can seem unusual because on land, presence matters. Movement creates response. A step changes the ground beneath you. A sound carries outward. Everything you do has some kind of effect that can be seen, heard, or measured. But at sea, that relationship is different. A ship moves across the surface of the water. It creates a wake, a brief disturbance that trails behind it. But that wake does not remain. It fades quickly within minutes, sometimes seconds. The surface returns to its original state, as if nothing had passed. The path you took leaves no lasting mark, no trace that continues to exist, only a moment that disappears as soon as it is created. And this happens continuously, every meter forward, every shift in direction, movement without memory, presence without imprint. And as you become aware of this, something begins to change, not in the ocean, but in the way you understand your place within it. Because if nothing you do leaves a lasting mark, if the water does not respond, does not adjust, does not retain, then your presence becomes lighter, not insignificant, but less fixed, less defined by impact. You are there, you are moving, but you are not altering what surrounds you. The ocean continues, as it always has, before you arrived, while you pass through, after you leave, unchanged. And in that continuity, there is a kind of stillness, not because nothing is happening, but because nothing depends on what you do. The waves do not rise because of your movement. The wind does not shift in response to your direction. The sky does not alter to acknowledge your presence. Everything continues according to its own rhythm, independent, complete, and at some point, this independence stops feeling distant. It begins to feel calm, or because it removes a certain kind of pressure, the need to act, to influence, to shape what is around you. Here, none of that is required. There is nothing to change, nothing to manage, beyond the simple act of continuing forward. And even that, in the larger sense, does not affect the whole. The ship moves, the ocean remains. If you stand quietly and look out across the water, especially at the moment when night begins to lift, and the first light appears, you may notice how complete that stillness feels. The surface stretches in every direction, no interruption, no boundary, only a gradual shift in color as darkness becomes light, and within that space, your presence is almost transparent, not invisible, but not emphasized. You exist within it without changing it, and that experience is rare because most environments respond, they reflect, they carry the mark of what passes through them. But the ocean, in its vastness, does not. It absorbs, it smooths, it returns to itself again and again without holding on to what has happened. And in that repetition, there is something steady, something that does not depend on events, only on continuity, wave after wave, moment after moment, unbroken, unaware. And if you remain in that awareness long enough, if you allow it to settle, the idea of being noticed begins to fade, not in a negative way, not as absence, but as release. You are no longer a center point, no longer the reference through which everything is measured. You are simply part of a larger space, moving within it, without needing to define it, without needing to leave a mark. And in that simplicity, there is rest, not the kind that comes from stopping, but the kind that comes from not needing to do more, only to continue. The ship moves forward, the water receives it without resistance. The sky changes without acknowledgement. Everything remains as it is, and that is enough, because in a world where so much depends on action, on response, on outcome, this is something different. A place where nothing is required except presence, and where presence does not need to be recognized in order to exist. The ocean does not notice, and because of that, it allows you to simply be there for a moment, for a passage, for as long as the journey continues, until eventually land appears again. Structure returns, movement becomes defined, and the awareness fades. But something remains, a quiet understanding that somewhere beyond all routes, beyond all systems, there is still a place where nothing is needed, where nothing changes, and where the ocean continues, unaware, unchanged, and completely still.